So let's settle in posture. I think a nice deep breath if it feels comfortable. And that sense of releasing. Uh, so interesting how our bodies take on tension and stress when we're not paying attention. Letting the shoulders release, relaxing the jaw, softening the belly. So a sense of the body's softening and in a sense, feeling yourself being drawn to the earth, letting gravity just bring the body more energetically towards the earth. Even as we sit upright with the spine holding us erect, we let go through the musculature of the body, letting the skeleton do the work. And feeling your body, if you can sense the body as a single object. And as you do that, you feel many different sensations at once, different points of sensation in the body, but seeing that it's all part of one organism can also be understood and felt as a field of energy. If you soften that energy or bring a tenderness to it, you can feel it as a field of loving energy. And this is the metta body, the body of loving kindness. Feeling the breath, a gentle movement, rhythmic, subtle. So then connecting with that breath, and letting that become your focal point. You might start by just feeling the whole of the breath. It involves uh, a range of aspects of the body. But the breath comes in at the nostrils and flows down the throat to the lungs, the air itself traveling, transmuting. And the rest, much of the rest of the body also involved the chest, the ribs, the belly, as they make space for the lungs to expand, creating room for the oxygen to enter, and then collapsing again to release. What seems like a simple action that we are so used to, when examined with precision, is seen to be extremely complex, dependent upon many parts of the body operating together. Anytime one of those parts malfunctions, we see immediately how delicate this process really is. We can we can practice with that full awareness of breath, or we can start to focus on a particular sensation, either at the nostrils or the belly, so that the attention becomes more narrow, more precise, more concentrated. And it's common for the mind to wander into thinking when we try to pay attention to the breath alone. Our practice is to keep returning, to patiently and gently persist. When working with mindfulness of the breath, the practice of loving kindness manifests as kindness towards ourselves and towards the wandering mind. There can be a tendency to be judgmental, feel frustrated with our lack of concentration, for instance. And here we want to bring a kindness and forgiveness, compassion towards ourselves. We come to understand that we don't really control the movements of mind. And so we let go of judging those movements. I had to run up and turn off the sprinkler. I don't know if you could hear that through the microphone. So we have over these months and now a year and a half been going through my book One Breath at a Time. We're in step 11, and we got to a section on loving kindness or metta, and so the last session, and I think today as well, using my book Living Kindness as a kind of way to explore this topic. I'll get back to One Breath at a Time sometime soon, I'm sure. But the other day, I guess Friday, I was talking about the chapter on having love for yourself, and especially putting it in terms of actions, of how we actually live, which of course is why the book is entitled Living Kindness. So kind of my underlying thesis here, one of the theses of this book is that that how we behave and how we live our lives is certainly as important to our loving kindness practice as how we feel. When we do a meditation on loving kindness, there's kind of a focus on on developing this feeling of love, and then kind of trying to send that to people, whatever that means. It's more of an imaginative or creative process. But where I find people stumble, and certainly I've had this stumble, is when that feeling isn't really getting evoked, that we can start to judge ourselves and feel that we're, less loving in some way, or that we're lacking something in our practice, and indeed in ourselves. We're failing at loving kindness, or whatever that sort of idea is. So that was one of the reasons I wrote this book, and certainly why I gave it that title, that I wanted to put it in terms of just living, which is very much a recovery concept as well. That we it's a program of action, we say, and I mean, it's an interesting sort of question about how in recovery world, the first thing is to stop doing this particular behavior. Generally, it's a behavior. It can be a mental thing with codependence, but just focusing on substance abuse, it's really about changing your behavior and then letting your thoughts kind of catch up with that. Whereas with meditation and Buddhist practice, we think of it as going the other way, and Ken said that at the opening about that the mind, we try to train the mind so that we can become different people, and this understanding that fundamentally all action comes out of the mind first, that the thought or the impulse to act comes before the action itself. And while I agree with Buddhism theoretically, it didn't really work like that for me, because I didn't change my alcoholic behavior by meditating. I didn't change other destructive, selfish behavior by meditating. Because it requires, essentially from Buddhist standpoint, I guess, right view, a real understanding to change. It's not enough to just sort of watch your mind. There has to be real clarity, and I guess there has to be this kind of willingness to change, which again points back to the recovery language. And the phrase in the recovery world, and someone might have to help me with this one. Sometimes I get it and sometimes I forget it, but it's we act our way into right thinking, because we can't think our way into right acting. So that's exactly the opposite of what Buddhism says. So and so you could think, well, there's a disagreement there, but I think it really, the acting our way into right thinking, strictly speaking, the Buddhist view is that you can't take those actions without the thought or the right intention behind them. So, I don't know if there's a real disagreement there. I think it's a matter of, what works for each individual. But certainly for me, taking the right action, even when my mind didn't want to, was critical. And so my mind I'm mentally ill, basically. I mean, yeah, I'm functional and everything, but I can get into dark places, no matter how I'm living. And so, for me, like staying on track with my behavior is the most important way that I actually do bring my mind back. And certainly, part of that is meditating, which is a primarily mental activity. So, yeah, it goes both ways. In any case, uh, the chapter I wanted to talk about today in Living Kindness is called Like Milk and Water, Living in Community. It's chapter 2. If you happen to have the book, starts on page 30. And it's about a sutta, as much of this book is, um, where a group of monks are living together and the Buddha comes to visit them. And the way I came upon this sutta, it was when my daughter was a toddler. And I wanted to give a talk about loving kindness. And I went into the Majjhima Nikaya, which is the collection of middle-length discourses of the Buddha. And I went to the index and I looked up loving kindness. And underneath it, it said loving kindness in action. There was one, uh, a subcategory there, loving kindness in action. I want to see what that is. And so it brought me to this sutta, which if you have the Majjhima Nikaya, it's number 31. It's called the Shorter Discourse in Gosinga. And the Buddha comes and visits these three monks who are kind of on a retreat in a forest. And he goes through this dialogue with the senior monk, Anuruddha, where he kind of keeps asking him question after question about how they live together, how they get along. And to me, it's very revealing that the way that they talk about how they get along is in terms of loving kindness, even though what they're describing is simply three people living in the woods together. And they say that they blend like milk and water. And Anuruddha says that at one point, he says, I put aside what I wish to do. He says, I consider, why should I not set aside what I wish to do and do what these venerable ones wish to do? So he's saying, in a moment when he's deciding what action to take, it's like, oh, why am I always thinking about my own preferences? What do these people want to do? And I remember reading that phrase for the first time and thinking how much it was like being a parent, that you're always putting aside what you wish to do and doing what the child, not necessarily what they want, but what they need. And seeing that doing that was an act of loving kindness, I found that very reinforcing of my practice, because it's so easy, going back to this idea of loving kindness as a feeling, it's so easy to think of loving kindness meditation and loving kindness, living with loving kindness, as being something you're supposed to be gushing out, smiles and hugs all the time, and rather than thinking, oh, I'm taking care of my child, that's an act of love, and I might not be particularly enjoying it or feeling it in this moment, but I am, that's what it is. And so I just find that really helpful in terms of my own kind of, my feelings about who I am, and my self-judgment, which of course we're all judging ourselves, and so this dialogue, it's very interesting. Just to say a little bit more about it, I really should have, the Majjhima Nikaya is over on my desk, but uh, it it goes on with, first of all, Anuruddha says that he practices loving kindness in thoughts, in words, and in deeds. So it's these three forms, and these are the three ways that we make karma. And he says he does it publicly and privately, which is, very revealing as well, that he does kind acts towards his fellows privately, just like making an anonymous donation. We know that there's like a different kind of karmic impact when you're not sort of expecting to be recognized and named. So there's anonymity there. But then the really funny scene, which I've talked about quite a bit, is when they describe uh, just how they take care of their little campsite. Uh, they just talk about how everybody participates in keeping it clean and taking care of it. It's very mundane issues, like cleaning up after their meal, and yet all these mundane issues have been preserved in this text for 2,600 years. So there's got to be a reason for that, right? So to me, the reason for that is that it's a message that this is important. How you can be a great meditator who sits there and radiates loving kindness to everybody in the world, and then you go up and you like start fighting with your spouse about, who left the dirty dishes in the sink, and to see that, that's no different. That it's all part of the same continuum. And again, it's something that I really missed in my early practice. I really thought like I could just like meditate and have these spiritual experiences, and then the rest of the time, if I was getting loaded and just like, living this kind of degenerate life, fine, doesn't, it has nothing to do with it. I'm getting enlightened. Don't bother me. And another beautiful line in here that I love, Anuruddha says, when he is thinking about helping out and doing, putting aside what I wish to do and do what the venerable ones wish to do. He says, "We are different in body, but one in mind." Beautiful sentiment. And and so the last thing I'll say that this is leading up to in this sutta, which is also very striking, is that just after this description of how they clean up their campsite, the Buddha says, and the Buddha's been inquiring about all this, and he's trying to really make sure that they're getting along. That's as an aside, one of the reasons he's particularly concerned about this is that he's just spent some time with some monks who are not getting along. So there's a famous quarrel at Kosambi. But he's asking these very mundane things. How do you get along, and how do you keep your campsite clean? And then he says, and do any of you have, exceptional meditation experiences? It's not the language that he uses, but he just flips over into this question about, like, are you getting enlightened through your meditation? And Anuruddha's like, oh yeah, yeah. And then they go through this whole other dialogue that's on these lofty terms that are just, you're kind of like, what? Like, how did we get from cleaning up the campsite to now we're having these, enlightenment experiences? And what traditionally what we can point to is that the Buddha is talking about, and what the sutta is talking about, is sila, samadhi, and panya. So sila is the ethical behavior that lays the groundwork for the development of concentration, and concentration lays the groundwork for enlightenment. But it's rarely is there a sutta where it's so distinct that we're talking about sila and then immediately show and go to these questions about panya, about wisdom, and that it's really making explicit the fact that you don't become enlightened if you don't have this sila as a foundation. There has to be this underlying ethical and really non-self-centered behavior, and of course this comes back to recovery again, because because this is what recovery is our ethical behavior. I mean, that's the foundation of recovery as well, and in recovery we also need to develop wisdom, or our recovery doesn't really go beyond being clean and sober, and isn't really what I would call recovered. And this is again why, and I guess I say this a lot, but why I enjoy working with people in recovery, because these issues that are taken up in the Dharma are so graphic in the lives of addicts. It's the idea of sila is not just sort of like, oh, I should, not step on bugs, so that I'm a good Buddhist. It's really, it's life or death stuff for us, and we really see it. And it's interesting because the result is that people who are in recovery who get into a serious Buddhist practice, I think I see them getting the fruits of practice to a great degree, sometimes to a greater degree than people who aren't in recovery, who are sort of missing this message a little bit. Now, of course, this is totally anecdotal and judgmental on my part. So, and I it's kind of like I'm rooting for my team. My team is the recovering addicts, and the people on the other team who aren't addicts, they aren't. We win, That's sort of probably not fair thinking, but there's been some circumstances that have made that that seemed clear to some degree. So living kindness, I think it's harder than doing loving kindness, frankly. I think it's kind of, it's not always easy, but generally speaking, just sitting there and sending love to everybody doesn't require a lot of commitment, just requires you being able to get your mind into a quiet space and feel good for a little while, feel positive for a little while. But to get out and go and live your life from a place of love, that's challenging. So let me open it up and see if there's any thoughts today from anyone.
Hi, Kevin. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Ann Peruzzi.
Hi. Hello.
Vulture.
Yeah, that was, thanks. It was, I just happened to be listening to the podcast last night, the Living Kindness with Dan Harris.
I haven't listened to that yet, I don't think.
You talk a little bit about that sutta,
Yeah.
the milk and honey.
Yeah, it's so much kind of my favorite,
Yeah, no, beautiful. And so, well, first that the meditation, there was something you said, loving kindness is the body, or I don't know, I heard it like that. And that just brought me into the word Dan used last night was mercy, what I heard last night. So I just felt this sense of just a clear kindness to myself, and or the way I can judge myself. I don't know. I entered a peaceful state. I don't know. But what do you think of like, I guess, living kindness or loving kindness on the spot? Like when you're out and about and you see, you pick up on someone struggling, or you yourself have a moment of struggle, whatever it is. I mean, to me, that's also kind of action, like when you're out and about and even though it might be private, I mean, you could offer it verbally too, right? Or an action. But even though it could be a private sort of,
Yeah.
I mean, I think I feel a change in my being when I do that. It's not just radiating, sitting in one spot in my own room, but it's out there.
Right. Yeah, that's right. That's a really good point, and yeah, another opportunity and challenge. Um, I mean, if you see someone struggling, or find someone to be irritating in some way,
Yeah.
to be able to remember compassion. Yeah, that seems like one of the really critical pieces, because again, otherwise it's just something we sort of as theoretical, and so it's what this is where mindfulness intersects with loving kindness, that we have to because mindfulness. I was just reading this from Analio. It calls it the recollective function of the mind. It's to recollect, because we know, like sati, right, has a connection to the word memory, and so we have to remember to be loving.
Mm-hmm.
We have to remember to be mindful. It's not hard to be mindful, I don't think, generally. It's hard to remember to be mindful.
Yeah.
And so, and then you have to remember the same thing. You have to remember to to do loving kindness. You have to remember to be compassionate, and that recollection is challenged by the habitual movements of mind. The aversive tendencies, the greed tendencies that tend to dominate. And so, since we're most of the time just running on this, unconscious reactivity, then to interrupt that it's why we have to practice and practice and practice to have any chance of recollecting in a moment.
Mm-hmm.
That to take, to let go, and to choose to act differently, and to choose to think differently in that moment. Yeah.
Yeah, it helps me. It really helps me remember when I'm out and about, and just standing in the grocery line.
Yeah.
Just whatever's in front of me, not happening fast enough, whatever.
Yeah, and
So,
I think Thich Nhat Hanh's gathas are one of the, that's what he's really trying to help people with, to like have like sort of these more or less prayers, phrases that just like you apply to routine situations. Like he talks about like getting in the car and saying, when the car goes fast, I go fast, or something, and using the red lights of the braking lights in front of you as mindfulness bells, and all those kind of tricks to kind of try to embed these habitual interruptions of our ordinary tendencies.
Yeah.
Takes a lot of work. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Steve, hi.
Good morning, Kevin. I couldn't agree with you more. Everything that you shared about all of us addicts in recovery, I really resonate with that. But there seems to be a convergence this morning for some reason in your daily inspirations in the books. You talk about financial insecurity, and
Mhm.
I get these daily meditations from Richard Rohr, and he was talking about this whole Christian concept around money. And then all of a sudden, the scholarship money comes available for the for the retreat. And I was sharing this last week about my feeling these regrets, and I'm just feeling anger towards the fact that I feel like I'm the only one in my family who's responsible for all the financial needs and raising my grandson. And so there's this whole convergence around uh, money for some reason today. And what that led me to was thinking about this living kindness. And I remember reading that part in the book. And what I'm trying to do is I have a real hard time, loving myself and being kind to myself. I seem to be able to do that with everybody else, especially family members. So I've gone to this practice of when I'm doing my mindfulness meditations, instead of doing may all beings be at ease, may all beings be happy, may all beings be free from suffering, I started doing it, may I be free from suffering, may I be
Sure.
patient, may
Yeah.
I be, and so when I start to fall out of this being self-kindness situation, I go to that. And it's just amazing how it's helping me dealing with my food addiction. It's one thing to be clean and sober, but this dealing with this food addiction that I've been with was that's been with me since I was a child. And it's
Yeah.
killing me slowly, and it's very frustrating. Very, very frustrating. But I'm doing that now. I'm learning to love myself and be kind to myself. So this work we're doing together it's really resonating with me, and I'm seeing a lot of hope in this. So thank you very much for that reading this morning, and that meditation was wonderful.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve. I mean, yeah. I mean, that Friday we're talking about the loving kindness towards yourself, and yeah, I think the two hardest aspects of loving kindness practice are loving kindness towards yourself and loving kindness towards the difficult person or the enemy, and you know, it's clearly um, a problem if you can't love yourself. I mean, I don't wanna, like put it, in really judgmental terms, but it's. I mean, and I'm not. I don't mean to suggest that like, oh, I mean, I think we all have. Many of us, maybe most of us, have that problem. So I'm not suggesting, like, yeah, wow, you've really got this special problem. But it clearly like such a impediment to happiness, to positive behavior, just like you said. I mean, it's so interesting. You think about food as this thing that's, nurturing and, and gets, and it's supposed to, bring health and everything. And then that we can use it in this destructive way is very telling about, the kind of uh, distortion of uh, love that sometimes happens, that like, eat. It's like, I've had enough. No, eat. It's like, wait. And then you're eating to like make somebody else happy or something, or and of course we eat to soothe ourselves because being full, quiet, calms that anxiety and all that. And I mean, it's just obviously a super complicated issue, which also has its physical addictive elements too. And so, but yeah, I mean, just keep working with loving kindness for yourself. You don't need to do it for others. I, I think, I don't think there's really ultimately any difference. I think if you are doing loving kindness for yourself, you are doing it for others. And, I was talking about this the other day about how the Buddha says radiating kindness over the entire world, and that we can think of that when our eyes are closed. Our world is our sense world. And so just radiating kindness through our own body and through our own consciousness is radiating it throughout over the entire world, just in sort of one take on that. Um, and when you feel that resistance there, that's the place to go, right? Because if it's, I mean, it's great to do loving kindness and, for people that, it's already there and you feel good about them, and you get to kind of have that nice, warm, tender feeling within yourself. And that's certainly to be enjoyed. But in terms of the work of cultivating and developing and where we loving kindness, the places we want to really look at are the places where there's some resistance. And if that's with yourself, then that's the place to hang out as much as you can, not to the point where it's uncomfortable. No, it's okay if it's uncomfortable. I mean, not to the point where it's like a battle where you're just in conflict with it, but just to work with it on a regular basis is really important.
Well, it truly has a calming effect. It really does. It has an extreme calming effect. It's way different than standing in front of the mirror and yelling and screaming and asking God to take care of your eating problem. So, it's really a different thing.
That's what you've been doing? I don't know.
Well, most of my life, yeah, standing in front of
Yeah.
the mirror, yelling at myself, God, please take this craving away. God, please help
Yeah.
me. What am I going to do? And now I just do this, and it's very calming. It takes those
Yeah.
cravings away.
Good. Well, and you know what I say about God, so
Yeah.
maybe you don't, but yeah, fuck God. So, Gabriella, hi.
Hi, Kevin. Do we have time for Ben to share as well?
Yeah,
Or
sure we do.
Okay,
I mean,
wonderful.
yeah.
I love this topic, and I too have eating disorder stuff, food issues, have for my whole life, and I'm in the OA program and bulimia for 28 years, and I've been abstinent now for over 6. And the food thoughts still come. It's really interesting because the drink thoughts don't come anymore, but the food thoughts still come. And the loving kindness and meta meditation has been profoundly healing for me because of all the shame that's around that issue of my life and how much shame I've carried for so much of my life. And one of the meta phrases that I use for myself, and I also use it as a prayer, is may I not harm myself with food or thoughts. Because it is the thoughts, and it is the food. And it's also for me over exercising, and it's also for me restricting, and but I love this part that you talked about, living kindness, because that's really where it is, right? Because there is so many times where I do feel that expansiveness or the forgiveness, right? For myself for having screwed up, or my food wasn't perfect, or whatever, really with my twisted sense of the way that my food is. If my food was perfect, it would be a diet, and that would be restrictive, and that's not recovery, right? That's not self-love, right?
Yeah.
But like you said, the living kindness and the thinking of what you read about the sutta and about that kind of compromising our own desires for the benefit, right, of everybody. And that's kind of one of our traditions in the 12-step rooms, right? But again, the living kindness also for myself, right? How can I be kind to myself today and forgive myself for not being whatever, right?
Yeah.
Or how can I be anyway, it's just I don't have that book of yours, but I hope that when you continue to go through these, maybe you'll go through that a little bit more in depth. And I can also get that book. But thank you so much for this teaching. It's lovely.
Thanks, Gabriella.
And any feedback I would love as well. Any tips or feedback would love.
Oh, I mean, I just hear you, everything you say makes sense to me. The one thing that, I thought maybe you were going to go to was like that clearly in the time of the Buddha, there wasn't this idea of codependence. Like, because why not put aside what I wish to do and do what these other the venerable ones wish to do, is is not the advice for the codependent, because the codependents do that too much, right? So we have to always be careful that we don't take on the teachings as these absolutes. That we always have to investigate whether they are appropriate for us, because when you look at the vast literature, the Buddhist literature, people pull out one line and then try to just that's their whole guiding principle, and that can become imbalanced. So
Yeah. No, you know what, that is that. And I used to be called from outside help. My therapist, who's the most amazing person in the world, said I was a pathological accommodator. And it was true. And both, right? I mean,
yeah,
and when being of service, right? Being of service in
right,
the 12 steps I had to start, learning to be of service, but not at the expense of my own well-being, which would lead me back into the disease,
yep,
right? Because then I'd be self-soothing over having it overextended,
yeah.
right? So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, I think we're always looking for that fix, the one thing that's going to fix everything if I just do this all the time, and that's addictive thinking. Yeah. Thanks. Nice to see you. Ben, hello.
Hello, Kevin, and yeah, thank you so much for hosting me. This is my first time at this meeting, and my heart exhaling, softening. First time in a Buddhist recovery meeting, 12-step meeting, which is wonderful because I've been having to do a lot of translation work when working in this program. I had a question for you. So I sensed that perhaps my primary obstacle to fully surrendering to my program and really going into the 12 steps is my gigantic spiritual ego, in the sense that I like this fantasy that one day I'll be able to meditate away my addiction, and that I'm going to be able to achieve such a high state of meditation, be able to go off into the woods alone, become a monk, and all these fantasies that I won't actually have to deal with this stuff anymore.
Right.
Now I do know that this is an avoidance strategy. This is me trying to avoid the necessity of like actually having to face my issues and speak with people and that kind of thing. But I can get very convinced by this voice in my head quite quickly. So while I know it's flawed, I wondered if you could also tell me why it's flawed and why it's wrong, so that I have more ammunition next time it rears its ugly head. Thank you.
This what you're calling your spiritual, what you call it, spiritual ego? Why that's flawed?
Yeah. So the voice saying that it's saying maybe I don't need to do the 12 steps because I'll be able to achieve such a state with meditation that I won't need them.
Right. So this is called the term for this is spiritual bypass. Are you familiar with that?
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah. So spiritual bypass means that you're going to avoid the messiness of life and the real challenges of life by just being so spiritual that they all go away, and it's a great delusion. It sounds really good, and I certainly believed that myself. I mean, you're describing something very similar to my own attitude when I came to Buddhist practice before I got sober. And the way I view it is that we have these kind of our lives kind of happen on several different levels. There's the level of the mental, psychological, emotional level, and then there's a spiritual level or a meditative level. But then there's also just the physical, behavioral level. And and they can be very disconnected from each other. And a perfect example of that is some of the gurus who were very brilliant teachers, but their personal lives, they were addicts or alcoholics or sex addicts or just abusers, and it's really hard to kind of make sense of how they could be so wise. And you read these books and you think, wow, they're so wise, and then you read about their lives and you realize, wow, they weren't living their lives the way they talked about. And sometimes they even use their spiritual practice as a justification for their behavior, which is a truly disgusting, frankly. It's really it's the worst kind of corruption in my mind. But nonetheless, for us as as not and so maybe so enlightened, what we're trying to do is avoid the real work and the messiness and and being with the feelings. I mean, the starting point is that we're trying to avoid feeling what we're feeling. So we're going to meditate so that we don't have to feel that, because it's the feelings that drive the actions, right? It's the feeling that I can't deal with what I'm feeling. It's the sense that I can't deal with this, that I need to be high, or I need to get drunk, or I need to act out sexually, or I need to eat in some way. And so, meditation can seem like a route around those feelings. But what it does is it just leaves those feelings unresolved, and so that they wind up kind of undermining and corrupting our lives and our mental states. So there's no real way around it. I mean, the cliche, the only way out is through, really does apply. Now, whether that means the 12 steps or not, that's another question. I mean, there are other ways to deal with addiction than the 12 steps. It's certainly the one that's best known, and it's what I have worked with. But the 12 steps are just a version of a process that has to be engaged in. And it's a process that requires this rigorous honesty, this willingness to really confront our shortcomings or failings or whatever our addictive behaviors, our addictive lifestyle, to really see that and really be honest about it, and to see the damage it's doing to us and to others, and then to find another way of dealing with, and that also involves really facing the feelings that drive it, the underlying impulses, and then that requires this commitment to a whole other way of living and being. And that's what step 3 is about, turning your will and your life over to the care of something. And, I say the Dharma, the Buddhist teachings, but it could be anything that's like a path to sanity. And it also, involves a community, because when we're alone with our own thoughts and our own ideas, we come up with solutions like, oh, I'll just meditate a lot, and it's not a solution, and so a community keeps reminding us, like, no, I've got to be honest, I've got to take responsibility for my behavior, I have to deal with these feelings, and I have to find the healing modalities that are going to help me through it. So yeah, meditation and spiritual practice can be a tremendous help and support in that process. And for me, the Buddhist teachings which are much more than just meditation and much more than just spiritual. They're really about addressing life and life's challenges on every level. They give me a lot of a framework for how to work with each element of my life, from the mental to the behavioral to the emotional. So it's a lot of work, you know. It just is a lot of work, and it's ongoing work, because those habits, the addictive mind, doesn't just go away because we want it to, or because we do, you know, we work at it for a while. You know, I've been sober for 36 years, and I have lots of difficult moments, but I feel like I have a lot of tools to live with them. I've kind of gone on too long on this, and I think what, you know, when Gabriella said, "Well, I have time for Ben," then a couple of other people kind of jumped on there, but it's really getting late, and I've got some work I've got to get to, so I'm going to have to let the other folks go, and I really apologize for that. But maybe next time. So thank you, everybody, for hanging out today.